strange, the way silence can scream. When I first stepped out of the truck, engine ticking into quiet, I half expected the forest to greet me with something grand. An eagle overhead, the distant crack of branches, maybe even a deer vanishing through the brush like some kind of spirit guide. But no, just stillness. Heavy, too thick for a first breath. Like the woods were watching, holding their breath. I stood there a moment, hands on my hips, trying to inhale it all. Freedom, solitude, whatever healing was supposed to feel like. A breeze moved across the tops of the jack pines and black spruce, whispering just out of earshot. I exhaled, the kind of sigh that's been months in the making. The stress, the city noise, the endless meetings and screens, all of it felt like it got yanked out with that breath. I was alone, finally. Technically, this was still Ojibwe land. My grandfather's blood ran deep in this soil. I'm only part Ojibwe, and growing up off-reservation meant the culture always sat just out of reach, something sacred and slightly mysterious, like the songs my mother hummed when she thought no one was listening. But now, standing here, backpack pressing into my spine and axe strapped to my hip, I felt closer to it than I ever had. This was the trip I'd promised myself for years. No phone, no work, just me, the trees, and time. The cabin sat a few clicks off the nearest ATV trail, more shack than home, inherited through some long-forgotten connection on my mother's side. It leaned into the side of a slope, wood grayed and mossy with age, as though it had grown out of the earth itself. The roof sagged in the middle, and the doors squealed like a scalded cat when I pushed it open. Inside, a wood stove, a cot, a busted sink with no pipe, and shelves thick with dust and dead flies. Perfect. I unloaded my gear, basic rations, flint, a solar battery, compass, knife, tarp. A week here, maybe 10 days. No distractions, no people. Just space to figure out what the hell was next. I didn't have a plan beyond that. Didn't want one. By sundown, I had a small fire in the pit out front, the light casting long shadows through the trees. I heated a tin of beans and chewed in silence, listening. This deep in the bush, there's always something. Crickets, the flap of wings, the occasional branch crack. But tonight, nothing. Not even a mosquito. That stillness again. I turned in early, bones sore from the hike in. Laid out on the cot with my coat under my head, I stared at the warped ceiling until sleep came in pieces. Sometime in the night, I dreamt of wind, loud, moaning wind, and someone walking just outside the cabin. Heavy steps, deliberate, not animal. I sat bolt upright in the dark, heart pounding. The wind was gone. The forest, dead quiet. I waited, breath shallow, listened. Nothing. Just a dream, I told myself. Too many horror podcasts, not enough REM sleep. I laughed under my breath, rubbed my face, and lay back down. But the unease stayed with me, coiled like a snake behind my ribs. Something about that dream had felt too real. Like I'd heard those footsteps before. Like they knew my name. The next morning, I woke with a stiff neck and the kind of headache that feels like it's coming from the back of your skull. I stepped outside to piss and noticed something odd. Tracks, not deer, not boot prints, barefoot, human. They circled the cabin, once, just once, then vanished into the woods. My stomach tightened. I scanned the tree line. The forest stared back. No one lives out here. No tourists hike this deep. I'm a day's walk from the nearest human being, give or take. And yet, I crouched beside the nearest print. The toes were long, longer than mine. The heel wide and deep, like whoever left it was heavy. I checked my own boot prints for comparison. No match. The stride was strange, too. A little off. Like the steps dragged, no clear beginning or end. Just appeared, then gone. I didn't eat that morning. Just boiled instant coffee and sat at the fire pit, turning my mug over in my hands, eyes drifting to the woods. Still silent, still watching. That night, the dream came again. The same wind, same walking outside the cabin. But this time, the steps didn't stay outside. They stopped at the door. And then, breathing. Low, ragged, animal, but somehow wrong. Like something trying to remember how to breathe human air. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By day 3, I stopped pretending I was here to relax. Something was off. Something in the land had shifted. And I felt like I'd stepped into a story I wasn't meant to hear. My dreams blurred with waking. Shadows moved just past the corners of my eyes. Once, as I knelt by the river to fill my canteen, I saw something across the water. Tall, skeletal, its limbs too long, too thin. Antlers. Blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell myself I imagined it. I didn't have to. Because I remembered the old stories. The ones my mother never quite finished. The ones my grandfather spoke of only when drunk or dying. The Wendigo. A spirit born of greed, of hunger, of isolation. I wasn't alone. And whatever was out there, it was hungry. By morning, I could smell it. It wasn't rot exactly, not the sweet, sickly scent of death. This was drier, older, like bones that had soaked in winter wind, or dust stirred in an attic sealed for decades. It clung to the air like smoke you couldn't see, only feel when it coated your tongue. And it didn't come from the cabin. It came from the trees. The unease had settled in fully by now, a cold knot in my stomach that didn't go away with food or hot coffee. I tried telling myself it was just the isolation, classic cabin fever. That scent? Maybe a dead raccoon under the floorboards. But that was a lie, and I knew it. Because when I stepped outside that morning, the smell got stronger. The forest was still silent. Utterly. Not a crow, not a squirrel. Even the mosquitoes had vanished. Like the woods had become sterile. Like something older than life had passed through and cleaned the earth of noise. I looked at the trees, and they looked back. I could feel it. I checked the trail camera I'd strung up on day 1, a cheap motion-activated unit I'd mounted facing the narrow path that led in from the north. Nothing. Not a single trigger in 3 days. Not even me. I tapped the display. It worked fine. So where were the animals? That's when I saw the bones. They were hanging from the trees. Bits of them. A deer leg stripped of flesh, swaying gently from a branch by some twisted sinew. A squirrel skull balanced in a fork of pine like a charm. I counted 5 in all, spaced out in a perfect semicircle around the clearing. They hadn't been there yesterday. I stared for a long time, the cold in my gut thickening into something sharper. Not just fear, recognition. These weren't placed randomly. They were marks, warnings, or boundaries. My first instinct was to leave. Pack up, walk out, forget the whole healing journey, and hitch a ride back to the cluttered chaos of cell towers and crowds. But part of me, a deeper part, the one I'd come out here to listen to, told me not to. Because I had entered something sacred. And scared as I was, I knew leaving without understanding it would curse me more than staying. So I stayed. I cleaned my knife that evening, checked the hatchet's edge. I boiled water, rationed food, went through the motions like they'd keep the shadows at bay. When night came, I tried reading by lantern light. But the smell pressed against the cabin walls, stronger now, closer. I couldn't eat. The dream started before I even fell fully asleep. I was standing in the middle of the forest, barefoot, shirtless, my breath frosting the air despite the warm spring. I was surrounded by trees that reached down instead of up, their limbs clawing toward the earth like they wanted to bury themselves. Something moved between them, tall, thin, covered in stretched, frostbitten skin. Its ribs stuck out like broken knives. Its eyes were holes, not empty, hungry. The Wendigo. But it didn't charge or roar. It watched. Then it spoke. Not aloud, but straight into my bones. A voice without words. A presence so cold it cracked my teeth. You came here to starve. I woke sweating, mouth dry, hands shaking. And the scent was in the cabin. The door was closed, the windows latched. But that dry, powdery scent of ancient flesh filled the space like smoke. My hands reached instinctively for my clapping sticks. Funny, I'd packed them more out of nostalgia than faith. They rested beside my gear, untouched. I hadn't used them once. I picked them up and tapped them together. Once, twice, a third time. No rhythm, just sound. A heartbeat in the dark, and the smell retreated. Slightly. I stayed awake until dawn, tapping slow, staring at the door like it might open on its own. I didn't know what I was doing, only that it felt right. Like some part of me remembered what the forest wanted, even if my mind didn't. When the sun rose, the scent slipped away with the last shadows. The bones were still in the trees. A new one had joined them. Tiny, blackened, still wet. A bird, fresh. There were no tracks, just the offering, or the warning. I stood there for a long time, under the rising sun, listening to the forest breathe. Still silent, but not empty, never empty. I hadn't seen the Wendigo with my waking eyes, but it had seen me, smelled me. It knew my name. It had tasted my fear, and I knew this thing wasn't stalking me. It was waiting, waiting for me to get hungry, to get lonely, to get cold. Because that's when the Wendigo comes, and it never leaves alone. It happened on the fourth night. Not a roar, not some Hollywood horror leaped from the trees, just a crack. Not in the trees, in me. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Couldn't. Everything tasted like ash, like that scent had wormed its way into my food and turned it bitter. Even water sat heavy in my gut, like it didn't belong. I boiled it again and again, triple filtered. Same result. My body wasn't starving yet. Not really. But my mind was. And that's where it started. I tried to journal, force my thoughts into neat little lines, pretend I was still in control. I wrote maybe 5 words before I crossed them out. The page blurred. My hand shook. I stared at the ink for minutes, watching it soak deeper into the paper, bleeding outward like veins. That's when I realized the ink wasn't black anymore. It was red. No, it just looked red. Just the light. Just my brain. I dropped the pen. I stepped outside, desperate for air, even if the trees felt wrong. The sky had turned gray, the kind of dead gray that happens before snow, even though it was too warm for snow. The sun had vanished behind the clouds, and everything looked bleached, even the greens of the underbrush. The bones were still hanging. More now. I counted 7. I didn't look too closely at the new ones. Instead, I walked. Slow, measured. Not far, just around the clearing, then down the edge of the stream behind the cabin. I told myself it was to clear my head. But in truth, I was listening. Not for sounds, for silence. The forest was a vacuum. I couldn't even hear my boots crush the moss. No birds, no flies, not even wind. But I felt movement. At one point, I bent to check a root that had been scraped, like something with claws had passed through. Not fresh, but not old either. That's when I caught the reflection. In the water, a shape behind me, thin, unmoving, head tilted. I spun. Nothing. Not nothing. Trees, just trees. But one of them was wrong. It wasn't even its shape. It was the stillness. Like it had forgotten how to sway. Like it was pretending to be a tree. Watching. I backed away, eyes locked on the knot tree. Didn't blink, didn't speak. When I finally turned, the water behind me was rippling, but there was no wind. I made it back to the cabin, bolted the door, shut the blinds, lit the lantern, even though it was still daylight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still looking through the cracks. That night, the dreams returned. Not a forest this time. A mirror. I stood in front of it, gaunt, pale, eyes sunken like I'd been lost for weeks. I didn't recognize my own face. I reached out, touched the glass, and the reflection grinned. Its mouth split impossibly wide, the skin cracking at the corners like old bark. No tongue, no teeth, just hunger. I woke gasping, cold sweat slicked down my spine. My hands shook as I reached for my gourd. It was empty. I know I didn't finish it. Something had drunk it. That was the first crack in me. Not a full break, just enough to let something in. A sliver, a whisper. I started hearing them the next day. Voices, not full sentences, just murmurs. Soft, like distant thunder or the sound of someone breathing behind a door. Always just as I was drifting off or waking. Sometimes I could swear it was my name. I started talking back, quietly, under my breath, just in case. That afternoon, I tried building a smudge, something I had read about. I found dried sage in my pack, a gift from my aunt I hadn't thought I'd use. I burned it in a small copper bowl, whispered old words I barely remembered from ceremony as a kid. I didn't expect it to work, but it did. For a moment, the scent of the burning sage cut through the air, not just masking the stench of the Wendigo, but pushing it back, like light through fog. But then I heard it. Not a voice. A step. One single footstep in the leaves just outside the cabin. I froze, bowl trembling in my hands. Then another. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The lantern flickered. I didn't breathe. The step stopped just outside the door. No knock, no growl, just silence. Thicker now, like the air had turned to oil. I whispered to the sage, voice trembling. Prayed. Sang, maybe. I don't remember the words, just the rhythm. The lantern steadied. The scent returned. Whatever was outside, it didn't enter. That night, I didn't sleep. Because I knew I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And I knew something else. The Wendigo doesn't just come for the starving. It comes for the fractured. And I was cracking more with every hour. The days began to bleed into one another. A dull wash of sunless mornings and endless shadows. The woods outside felt less like a place and more like a trap. I kept waking to that cold, suffocating silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes every breath a battle. I hadn't heard the voices again, but their absence was worse, like a quiet before a storm that never comes. I rationed my food and water carefully, but the wilderness had its own hunger. My body was losing the fight. My hands trembled more, my vision blurred with every blink, and my thoughts felt like static, fragmented, noisy, disconnected. I could barely hold a thought long enough to finish a sentence in my head. I tried to stay busy, chopping wood, collecting firewood, filling my water jug from the stream. But the creek's flow was thinner than it had been the first day, and the water tasted faintly metallic, like rust mixed with earth. I started to notice changes in the forest. Subtle shifts I couldn't explain. The trees seemed taller and thinner, their branches skeletal, claw-like. The moss was patchier and the shadows deeper. One evening, I caught a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A tall, lean figure, disappearing behind a crooked birch before I could blink. I told myself it was a deer, a trick of the light. But I knew better. The Wendigo is a thief of life and sanity, a whisperer of madness. I felt it gnawing at the edges of my mind, pulling at the threads that kept me whole. I started to question what was real. One night, I found myself standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the dark woods with hollow eyes. My breath came out in white clouds despite the late summer heat. My body felt too heavy to move, but my mind was spinning. Caught between a primal urge to run and an impossible magnetic pull toward the darkness. I whispered an old prayer under my breath, calling on the spirits of my ancestors. But the woods only answered with silence. And then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows, gaunt, towering, impossibly thin, with eyes that burned like cold coals. The Wendigo. It moved with a terrible grace, limbs bending in unnatural angles, fingers long and sharp like broken branches. Its skin was stretched tight over bones, pale and translucent, like dead leaves pressed thin by the weight of years. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching me with an intelligence that chilled me to the core. I didn't run. I couldn't. Instead, I stood frozen, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. The Wendigo tilted its head, a slow, deliberate gesture. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in a terrible, hollow voice that echoed inside my skull. A voice filled with hunger, with despair, with the endless, aching loneliness of a creature cursed to roam the wilderness forever. It told me I was not alone, that the hunger inside me was not weakness, but power, that I could join it, or resist. And with that, it vanished back into the shadows. I fell to my knees, gasping, tears streaming down my face. I realized then that the Wendigo was not just a monster in the forest. It was the darkness inside me, the part of me that was breaking, the part that could be lost or saved. I didn't know which, but I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. The woods were changing me, and I was changing with them. I woke with blood under my fingernails. Not a lot, just crusted into the edges like dirt, but enough to make me freeze halfway out of my sleeping bag. My arms ached, my nails were chipped. The skin on my knuckles was scraped raw. I hadn't dreamed, or if I had, it had vanished the second I opened my eyes. I looked around the cabin. The walls were the same, the axe still resting in its corner, the door still latched shut with the extra bar I'd wedged across it 2 nights before. Everything looked normal, if you ignored the smell. Not rot exactly, not even death. It was like something sour, animal, thick enough to taste in the back of my throat. I opened the door to get air and stepped outside. That's when I saw it. Scratches, dozens of them, carved deep into the birch trees that ringed my clearing. Long gouges clawed downward in parallel lines, too high for any bear, too even. Some curved, some jagged, some had marks beneath them, shapes that almost looked like characters, like language, but wrong, old, hungry. They circled the cabin, not just on one tree, on all of them, like something had walked the perimeter of my shelter in the night, dragging its claws along every trunk as it passed. I backed away, breath catching. I turned in slow circles, watching the tree line, my heartbeat building like a drumbeat. Nothing moved, but I felt it. The forest was aware of me now, not in the peaceful, healing way I had once hoped. No, like a mouth that had tasted something sweet and wanted more. I grabbed the axe and my small hunting knife and hiked a mile to the creek, needing open air, light, something. I splashed my face, filled the gourd, tried to think like the calm, sensible man I used to be. But that man was fading, fast. The deer trail I had followed days before looked different now, narrower. The trees leaned in. Noticed small bones among the roots, bird skulls, hollowed mice, things twisted and left in piles. A pattern, maybe. Everything felt arranged. Watching the water move through the creek, I almost dropped my axe when I heard it again. A rustle. But not from the ground. From above. I tilted my head and saw it. Not clearly, but enough. A branch bent under weight, then sprung back. A shadow shifted in the canopy. Too big for a possum, too graceful for a roo. It slipped through the upper branches without a sound, without snapping a twig. It was following me from above. I ran. I tore through the brush, heart in my throat, lungs burning. The woods closed in, faster than they should have. The sun dimmed, shadows stretched. I knew I'd lost my way, but panic doesn't reason. It just drives. I didn't stop until I tripped on a root and landed hard, hands sinking into cold, soft earth. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. Another fire pit, not mine. Surrounded by rotted logs, a campsite, old, maybe years old. And on one of the logs, there were deep gouges, not in Ojibwe symbols, but crude shapes, a warning left behind. A name carved into bark, Daniel. Underneath, in shaky lettering, don't listen, don't eat, don't stay. My stomach dropped. The wind shifted, and I heard it again. That same croaking voice. Only this time, it wasn't calling from far off. It was whispering, right behind me. I turned slowly, too afraid to breathe. Nothing. But the trees trembled. The leaves twitched. A low moan slid between trunks, rising, swelling like the wind itself was grieving. Then silence. And then the smell hit. Raw meat left too long in the sun, mixed with soil, sweat, and death. I backed away from the pit, my pulse skittering like a trapped bird. I didn't know where I was anymore, but I knew one thing. I wasn't the first. Others had come. Others had tried to leave signs. And now their warnings were mine. I found my way back to the cabin at dusk, legs shaking, hands blistered. I marked the door with my own carvings, symbols from what little Ojibwe I remembered. Protection, warding, spirit lines. I whispered my grandmother's stories like prayers, like armor. But when night fell, and the forest held its breath again, I could hear something scrape against the wall outside. Slow, measured, deliberate, like it was learning my shape, my scent, my name. I lay in the dark, axe beside me, heart thudding like a war drum. The Wendigo was no longer lurking. It was circling, and I didn't know how long I could hold it off. The scratching stopped just before dawn. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, stiff under the weight of my blanket, eyes locked on the sliver of moonlight spilling through the gap in the shutter. I counted every breath, every creak of the floor, every flicker of wind that might have been something else. When the first light hit the edge of the cabin, I stood up on wooden legs and peeled the door open. Nothing. No tracks in the dirt, no sign of claw marks, no shadows darting away. But the silence was worse than proof. The forest was too still. Not even a bird call. It was like the whole place had gone underground. Even the flies were gone. I gathered my gear, what little I had left, and decided I had to get out. I didn't know where I'd go, just that I had to move. Keep moving. A straight line toward sunrise. As I crossed the clearing, I passed the largest birch tree at the edge of my camp and froze. My name was on it, not scratched in by me, carved deep with something sharper than any blade I owned. Daniel was still visible, faded and warped, on the log in that old camp. Now, beneath it, was mine. Caleb, fresh, clean. I stared at the letters until my vision blurred. My hands began to shake. I didn't tell the forest my name, but it knew now. The hike was agony. My legs were shot from the panic run yesterday, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been wrung out like a wet rag. I didn't care. I pushed forward, eyes flicking between trees, always checking the branches above. At first, I thought I was imagining it. That sound, like someone breathing in, but never out. Just that long inhale, over and over, impossibly deep. But it followed me, sometimes behind, sometimes off to the side, always close. Around noon, I found another marker, a cairn, stones stacked neatly, carefully. 7 flat ones, balanced in a way that looked impossible. I crouched and touched the top one, warm, as if someone had just placed it there. I stepped back and noticed something I hadn't before. Bone, under the bottom layer, a shard of something yellow-white and cracked. Human. I left it and didn't look back. By the time dusk crept in again, I found a narrow glade and built a fire. I didn't care about smoke or attracting anything. I needed light, warmth, something human. The flames leapt higher than they should have. Too fast. like the fire was starved and fed off more than just twigs. I sat with the axe in my lap, clapping sticks against my boot for rhythm, hoping the sound might ground me, keep me tethered to something that wasn't this whispering, hungry forest. That's when I heard it. A voice. Low, wet, familiar. Caleb. I stood slowly, heart squeezing. Who's there? The woods answered with silence, but I heard it again, from the other side. Help me. That voice. It sounded like my brother. Jason. But Jason was dead. 6 years ago. Car crash outside Thunder Bay. Closed casket. And yet, I heard his voice again, this time from behind me. Come on, bro. Help me out. I turned, fists clenched around the axe, fire flickering wildly. Nothing. And then I saw it, just at the edge of firelight. A man's shape. Naked, gaunt, skin gray and stretched like old parchment over bone. Its eyes were black pits, too large, too deep, and its mouth. Its mouth was grinning, impossibly wide. Lips torn, teeth like broken glass. It didn't move, just stood, mimicking Jason's slouch, head tilted, arms hanging loosely. Then it opened its mouth, and my voice came out. Don't run. I swung the axe through air. The shape vanished like smoke. My legs buckled. I dropped to the ground and screamed until I couldn't hear myself anymore. It was playing with me, wearing memories like masks, sifting through my head like a pantry, looking for whatever it could use to bring me closer, to break me down, to let it in. Later, maybe hours, I opened my eyes. The fire was nearly out, and at the edge of the ring of ash were bare footprints, toes splayed, heels sunken into the dirt, circling. I didn't sleep again that night. Not because I was scared. Because I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd start to believe that the thing wearing my brother's face wasn't lying. That maybe, just maybe, he really had called out. That maybe it could bring people back. And that's the worst part. Not the monster in the woods, but the sliver of hope it slips inside you, like a hook. Because once you start hoping, you'll do anything, even open the door. I left the glade just before sunrise. Didn't bother packing the fire, didn't eat, didn't drink. Just kept walking. I didn't know what I was walking toward, but I sure as hell knew what I was walking away from. The woods had changed. I don't mean figuratively. Trees weren't where they should have been. I started seeing ones I swore I'd passed the day before. The rocks too, patterns repeating, the same split granite with the same mossy vein running across its side, like I was walking in circles. But the compass on my watch stayed steady. Then the whispers began. Not words, just fragments. A voice almost caught in thought, like someone thinking out loud, but not in any language I could place. It wasn't in my ears, it was in my bones. I reached a stream I hadn't seen before. Narrow, dark, not a ripple. The water was so still it looked like a cut in the ground rather than something living. And yet I could hear it, breathing. I crouched and looked down. My reflection looked back, except it wasn't mirroring me. My eyes blinked after I did. My mouth opened, though I hadn't moved a muscle. And then it smiled. that wide, lipless Wendigo smile. I stepped back so fast I nearly tumbled in. Something was wrong with the land. Not just haunted, wounded. I kept going, deeper, letting instinct guide me, even though it had failed me before. I didn't trust my mind anymore, my compass, my eyes, not even my name, carved into bark like a warning. All I had was motion, forward. It started snowing by midday, in June. The air shifted without warning. One moment sweat poured down my back, the next my breath came out in plumes, and frost coated the pine needles. It wasn't weather, it was something else. That night, I stumbled on a place I still struggle to describe. A clearing, or maybe a circle. Too perfect to be natural. Trees bent away from it, roots exposed, like they'd been trying to crawl out. The ground was bare, blackened, frozen dirt. No leaves, no grass, no life. The silence hit like a wall. No birds, no breeze, no heartbeat. Dead center stood a stone, maybe 6 feet tall, jagged, covered in what I first thought was moss. But the green was wrong. Slicker, wetter. I walked toward it, drawn in like a moth to flame. My ears popped, like I'd stepped through something, passed into a place where the rules didn't apply. And then, just beyond the edge of the trees, I saw the others. Figures, dozens of them. Not people, not fully. Shadow-thin, rib-thick faces hidden by the dark, but I felt them, like they were watching, waiting. Some crawled, some perched in branches, limbs wrapped around trunks like centipedes. Others simply stood, unmoving, arms at their sides. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt full of ash. Then I heard her. A voice I hadn't heard since I was 9. "Come here, sweet boy." My mother. She died of cancer. I watched her fade for a year, thin as paper, too weak to hold my hand at the end. But now her voice drifted through the clearing, warm, kind, gentle. My legs moved on their own, toward the stone, and on the other side of it, I saw her. Hair tied back in that old scarf, cheekbones sharp, brown eyes soft. She smiled, held out her hand. I almost took it. God, I wanted to take it. But something inside me screamed no, not in words. Just a flood of dread so complete, it nearly dropped me to my knees. She stepped forward, and I saw her feet, wrong, hooved, split and blackened like a deer's, but too wide, like they'd burst out of shoes not made for them. Her smile stayed the same, but her eyes turned flat, pale, empty, no pupils, no iris, just winter in a human skull. The spell broke. I turned and ran. I didn't care where. I just bolted. Behind me, something let out a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a growl. It was hunger made noise. And behind that, the whisper of dozens of limbs brushing branches as they followed. I tripped, fell hard, busted my lip open. The trees bent above me like watching vultures. And from behind, that sound came again. Not hunger, laughter, thin and cruel, like twigs snapping in rhythm. The Wendigo had shown me what it wanted. Not my death, not my flesh. It wanted me to give up, to let go. Because the moment I did, it wouldn't need to chase me anymore. I crawled beneath a fallen log, covered myself in dirt and needles, pressed my back to the earth, and waited. The snow fell heavier now, but beneath it, I could still hear their footsteps circling, waiting for the moment I stopped fighting, waiting for me to belong. I didn't sleep. Buried beneath a log, I kept still while the forest forgot to breathe. Snow gathered on my chest, melting into my collar, soaking me through. But I didn't move, not even when something sniffed at my ankle, wet and heavy, the way a dying man breathes through mucus. I don't remember when the sound stopped. Just that suddenly, I was alone again. Alone in the way you feel after grief or heartbreak. That hollowing kind of silence. When I finally crawled out, the trees looked different. Bent, heavy with frost and something else. Memory, maybe. Not mine. The forest's. It felt like the woods were watching, waiting to see what I would do next. Like it already knew, and I was just playing out the part. I kept moving. North, I think. My compass stopped working sometime in the night. The screen cracked, spinning lazy loops. But I could feel the land nudging me. I followed the rises and dips of its breath. Every now and then, I'd see marks in the snow, lines, curves, spirals. Not animal tracks, not human either. More like symbols. I didn't know what they meant, but they felt old. Older than stories. By late afternoon, I found the cabin. It wasn't on any map. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. Just there, like it had always been waiting, sinking into the landscape. The door was closed. Smoke trickled from a crooked chimney. Either someone was inside, or something wanted me to believe that. I almost walked away. But something about it pulled at me, the way dry ground pulls at rain. I knocked. No answer. I opened the door. The smell hit first. Cedar, wood smoke, faint sweetness beneath it all, like chokecherries. Inside was dim, lit only by a fire that burned low in the hearth. Animal hides on the walls, bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, curling in the warmth. A single chair faced the fire, and sitting in it, wrapped in a wool blanket, was a man. Elderly, gaunt, skin like bark, lined deep, hair white and thin. He turned his head slowly, eyes cloudy but sharp. "You took your time," he said. His voice wasn't surprised, just tired, like he'd been rehearsing those words a long time. "I don't know who you are," I said. He laughed softly. "Don't need to. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Sit down." I did. There was no food, no drink, just the fire and the silence. "They showed you the clearing," he said, not a question. "Yeah. And your mother." I looked up. "How do you—" "They always do. Show you the thing you ache for, the softest part of you. That's where they get in." He leaned forward, fingers shaking as he warmed them. "You're lucky." You didn't answer. I almost did. But you didn't. That matters. Most don't make it past that part. I stared at the flames, hypnotized by the way they curved in on themselves. "I've seen it before," he said, quieter now. "The Wendigo doesn't just eat. It remakes, turns your want into its mouth, your regret into its bones." He turned toward me, voice brittle. You're not being hunted, you're being tested. The fire cracked. I came out here to escape, I said, almost to myself. Work, noise, grief. He smiled sadly. You came here to find out who you are without all that. I nodded. And? I don't know anymore. He let that hang between us. Most people don't, he said at last. That's why the Wendigo's so patient. I swallowed hard. Why hasn't it killed me? He leaned closer. Because you haven't broken yet. That's what it really wants. Not your body. Your surrender. I thought about the clearing. The stone. My mother's voice. So sweet and so wrong. Then how do I stop it? He looked toward the fire. You don't. You just walk. Keep moving. Remember what's real. He reached into a small leather pouch beside the hearth and pulled out something wrapped in faded cloth. He handed it to me. A tobacco bundle tied with a red thread. Leave this at the tree line when you go. Not an offering, a reminder that you still belong to something older than your fear. I took it, hands trembling. Who are you? He didn't answer. The fire flared once, then died to coals. When I blinked, the chair was empty. Just the fire and the cold creeping in through the floorboards. I left before sunset, didn't look back. Outside, the woods were quiet. For now. I held the bundle tight in my fist, thumb tracing the knot. I had the sense I was still inside something. Something that watched from behind bark, that listened through the wind in the pine needles. A place that remembers. The thin place. I wasn't out of it yet. But I was walking. And that, for now, was enough. The snow fell like ash now. Soft, constant, muting the world into a white silence that pressed against my skull. I couldn't tell what day it was. My boots were soaked through. My breath hung long in the air, but my body didn't feel cold anymore. It scared me more than anything. I kept the tobacco bundle tucked close to my chest. I hadn't spoken aloud in hours, maybe longer, but I whispered a word now and then. Names, mostly. My mother's, my grandfather's. A teacher I had in high school who used to drum her fingers on the desk when she was nervous. Little things, anchors, because the forest was starting to change again. It didn't look different, not at first. Still the same pine, the same birch, the same hollow wind threading between trunks like it had a mind of its own. But the air felt wrong, heavy with something not quite sound. Then I noticed it. The shadows between the trees didn't match the light anymore. They stretched in directions they shouldn't. One reached toward me. I picked up my pace, sticking close to a ridge where the snow broke just enough to show bare rock. No prints. I made sure not to leave any. Every step, I watched the ground behind me like a hawk. And then I heard it again. Not the screech, not the croak, just my voice. From the trees, calling my name. It sounded like I did when I was 10, whining, scared, helpless. Dad. Dad, come back. I don't know where you are. I froze. It wasn't a memory. It was happening now, from the shadows just ahead. The voice was me. Panicked, trembling, begging. I should have run. But part of me, some old scar from childhood, wanted to go to it. To that helpless little boy I used to be. wandering alone in the woods behind my grandfather's house when I got lost once for hours. I took a step toward the sound, another, and then I remembered what the old man said. They show you the soft part. I stopped. I backed away, and the voice changed. It dropped low, wet, cracking like meat being chewed underwater. "You're nothing without them," it said. "A man unmade. You came here to vanish. I can help you with that." The shadows peeled back. Something stepped out, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was tall, gaunt, not starved, stretched, like something trying to remember how human skin was supposed to fit. Its skull had the rough shape of a man, but no eyes, just pits weeping black, like tree sap. Its jaw unhinged slowly, revealing far too many teeth. Yellow, some broken, some still chewing. Its arms dangled down past its knees, fingers bone-thin, tipped with cracked claws. Its ribs stuck out like branches. But worst of all, it wore faces, strips of them, stitched into its chest, across its arms, hanging from its hips like trophies. I saw my mother's among them, and mine, not dead, still moving, blinking, twitching, whispering. The Wendigo didn't move toward me. It waited. And I understood. This was the choice. The forest was thinning. I could see the edge now. Beyond it, a frozen creek. And past that, the slope down towards where I remembered the Ranger Road used to be. If I ran, I might reach it. But the Wendigo was offering something else. Oblivion. No more grief. No more pain. No more clawing my way through broken days, trying to feel human again. I could lie down in the snow, let it all go. The wind picked up, and the thing shivered, flesh cracking like ice. It held out its hand, and I almost took it. But I remembered the bundle. I remembered my grandfather's voice, shaky with age, but always steady when he talked about the land. Everything here listens. Even if you forget yourself, the land remembers. I pulled the tobacco out and held it in both hands. The Wendigo hissed, recoiling, not in fear, in rage. The shadows swarmed, spiraling toward me, mouths whispering my name in voices that weren't mine anymore. I stumbled back, reached the edge of the trees, and placed the bundle gently in the snow. Not an offering. A reminder. Smoke rose from it, not from fire, from memory. The ground beneath it pulsed, faintly, like a heart still beating. The Wendigo screamed. The air shook, but it couldn't follow. The boundary held, and I walked away. Not because I was strong, but because I remembered.